Many modern theologies assume there is a specific chronological age of accountability, a magic birthday where a child suddenly becomes culpable before God. But search the Masoretic Hebrew or the Greek New Testament, and you will not find it. The concept simply does not exist in the ancient texts. The biblical system operated on a rigorous, phased model of functional legal agency rather than a calendar date for salvation. To see how this system actually worked, we have to look at the mechanics of ancient Near Eastern jurisprudence, specifically through the lens of property law and civil liability. We can track this legal framework across a millennium of continuous practice, starting with the Torah, moving through the Dead Sea Scrolls, and culminating in the Rabbinic Mishnah. Understanding ancient biblical justice requires discarding modern theological assumptions and adopting the strict structural gravity of the ancient legal mind. This diagram illustrates the foundation of the Bet Ab, or the father's house. Under this structure, a minor possessed zero independent capacity. Because a child cannot legally own property, they cannot pay restitution. Therefore, the law routes all liability up to the ball. Exodus 22 outlines a specific case study in agricultural tort law. If an owner lets an animal loose to graze in another man's vineyard, he must pay restitution from the best of his own field. In Hebrew jurisprudence, a dependent child and a grazing animal share the exact same legal status regarding civil liability. Both lack legal intent, and both lack the capital to pay for the damage they cause. Because of this shared status, the court bypasses the actual actor. It does not punish the animal or prosecute the dependent child. It targets the father for failing to secure his household's assets. The parental shield was a strict economic and judicial mechanism designed to protect minors from civil ruin while guaranteeing restitution for victims. Beyond civil torts, criminal liability required a specific cognitive threshold known as da'at, legal intent or knowledge. This principle is central to the lex talionis found in Exodus 21, the law of an eye for an eye. In ancient Hebrew courts, this was a standard for exact financial restitution based on the economic value of the lost faculty. Because a child cannot pay financial restitution and lacks the cognitive maturity to form malice aforethought, the court grants them full criminal immunity under this system. The text explicitly recognizes this state of moral infancy. In Deuteronomy 1:39, God distinguishes adult actors from the little ones, describing children as those who have no knowledge of good and evil. Accountability is impossible without da'at. True guilt requires the verified cognitive capacity to discern and choose between good and evil. This matrix charts the timeline of accountability. Ancient law measured agency against physical development. Stage 1 is tough, spanning infancy to age 12, marking zero legal agency. Stage 2 is na'ar, ages 13 to 19, marking biological puberty and the awakening of moral choice. The prophet Isaiah references this specific developmental threshold, describing it as the age when a youth begins to refuse the evil and choose the good. But during this na'ar phase, agency is still limited. Numbers 30 demonstrates that while youths have the cognitive capacity to make a vow, the father retains a binding legal veto over their words. Stage 3 is ish, or adulthood. This is the absolute hard threshold for full civic, military, and legal accountability, established at age 20. The military census law in Numbers 1 explicitly defines an adult as anyone 20 years old and upward able to go forth to war. God applied this exact legal standard for divine judgment during the Israelite rebellion in the wilderness. According to Numbers 14, the penalty of death in the desert was restricted exclusively to those who were 20 years old and upward. The timeline proves that accountability was never a single switch flipped in childhood. It was a decades-long phased transition from complete legal immunity to ultimate gravity. This phased timeline of agency was the actively practiced law of the land for over 1,000 years, extending well into the Second Temple period. We find exact parallels in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which detail strict codes for communal accountability. The Qumran rule of the congregation legally deferred full agency, including the capacity for testimony and the knowledge of good and evil, until a person reached the exact age of 20. Centuries later, the rabbinic codification of the oral law continued this tradition. The Mishnah established rigid chronological boundaries to prevent judicial inconsistency in the courts. Mishnah Pirkei Avot formally transitioned the responsibility for religious commandments to age 13, marking the biological onset of puberty. However, in matters of civil law, Mishnah Bava Kama explicitly grouped minors with the deaf-mute and the mentally incapacitated, granting them total exemption from damage payments. The overwhelming consensus of historical jurisprudence verifies a single reality. Ancient courts recognized children as legally inaccessible for prosecution. By overlaying the Bet Ab structural canopy onto our timeline matrix, the biblical logic locks into place. At the age of 20, the parental shield lifts away. This threshold marks the point of legal independence. The biblical system relies on a sophisticated calculus of biological and legal development rather than an arbitrary date for guilt. Every individual progressed from the complete corporate covering of infancy, passing through the awakening choices of puberty, to the gravity of the military census. The ancient legal mind understood that guilt cannot be assigned where restitution cannot be paid, and where intent cannot be proven. True accountability only arrives at the exact moment the parental shield is permanently removed. It is the moment an individual possesses the complete capacity to stand alone before the law.